Hugh's story is one of hundreds that we could tell. The past 2 years, the Community West Foundation, with all of your support, has helped to produce many of these films, these short documentaries that we are using to engage the community, to dispel myths, to make these stories real, and to inform and educate and motivate the public. You're going to see another one here shortly, and Darren's going to talk a little bit more about the films and how we're using them. The other strategy that we have used as the Refugee Services Collaborative is not only to tell stories, but to really produce hard data that can persuade and motivate communities, employers like the Odie Company and others to join us in this work. Refugee resettlement provides Cleveland with a tangible response to international humanitarian crises, and we get to do our part here in Cleveland to alleviate those sufferings, to reverse the injustice in some small way. It's also a fundamental response to faith. Both Jewish and Christian scriptures are of one voice on this matter: to treat the foreigner in our midst as though they were family, to welcome the stranger as though he were Christ himself. Doing so is a command that proves that our religion is more than just words. And living out those mandates contains blessings, not the least of which is the economic benefit of our entire city. We knew that at the Collaborative to be true. We knew it intuitively. We didn't have the data. We saw how hard refugees worked once they were brought here, how motivated they were, how eager they were to start their lives over. But we didn't really have the data as a bunch of nonprofits to prove it, which is why a few years ago we commissioned an economic impact study. And having that data has been absolutely critical in changing the conversation about refugee resettlement in Cleveland and what it means, not only from a humanitarian or a faith perspective, but also from it's just good economics for our city. So what were the results that we learned? They were, there we go. They were pretty incredible. The top line story was that in the year that we did the study, we collaboratively, all the agencies spent $4.8 million to resettle refugees, but that those same people returned $48 million in economic activity to our community. They rented homes, they bought goods, they paid taxes, they bought services. And as the slide shows, oh, wait a minute. Is that advancing on its own? I didn't touch it. I'm not paying attention to what my slides are. As this slide shows, not only are they, for every dollar we spend to bring them here, they return they return $10 to our community. It's fantastic. It's not the only reason why we do it, but it certainly is a great reason why we do it. And on top of that, the brown graph at the top shows that Cleveland, in every way imaginable, beats most cities on average in terms of how it resettles refugees. Refugees come to work here and they make more money. They have a higher rate of employment. 74% of them are getting jobs versus 58% nationally. They get placed faster by just a couple weeks. And they are far less dependent on public assistance, only 8.1 for the long term versus 12.4 nationally. We've got more to be proud about in Cleveland than just LeBron James, is what this slide tells you. The nonprofits, the employers, and the foundations that support this work are really changing Cleveland for the long haul and in incredible ways. The study also allowed us to get at some long misheld myths and correct some misunderstandings about refugees. For example, this is a very common one, and we learned that it's not true. Employers locally tell us that refugees are willing to take jobs that they can't get Americans to fill consistently. But these motivated people are. Why? It's because they have an unmatched work ethic that translates for employers into more efficient operations and improving the bottom line. Moreover, refugees are more likely than the average community resident to start a business. They're extremely entrepreneurial. Since 2006, the refugees that we've brought to Cleveland have started 38 businesses on their own, employing 141 people in the community, which is absolutely pretty amazing. Second myth, refugees are a burden to taxpayers. It's not true. What the economic impact study showed is that when we give a refugee a helping hand, they take it and they run with the ball. The majority of them receive cash assistance in the form of public benefits for less than a year, by which time they are completely self-sufficient. They no longer qualify for a government handout or assistance. Refugee households in our county spend approximately $22 million a year in our community. And in the past decade, they have purchased 300 plus homes in our county, many of them formerly vacant. So they are bringing some amazing assets to our community. One of the things that Building Hope adds of value to the Refugee Services Collaborative is our ability to attract volunteers, many volunteers from this congregation, in fact. And we work with the other partners to place these volunteers into homes as family-to-family mentors. And I just want to tell this one story about this one volunteer and her family a few years ago, because it really applies to this, busting this myth. Shortly after, maybe about a year after being here, they came to their mentor and they said, "We want to buy a house." And she immediately called us and said, "What am I supposed to do? My family wants to buy a house and they can't possibly afford to buy a house, and I'm not sure how to, help them understand reality." And so we said, well, why don't you have a really kind of honest conversation about them, about what it takes to actually purchase the house. And so she went and she sat down and she said, you actually have to have a down payment. And they're like, "Yeah, we have a down payment." And she's like, no, you got to have 20, 30%. And they said, there are 5 people working in the household, all earning around minimum wage. And they said, well, we've saved up $30,000 under our mattress. Is that enough for a down payment? 5 people working in minimum wage jobs were able to save $30,000 for a conventional mortgage. That's the kind of ethic that's being brought into our community through many of these folks, and it's a real asset. Finally, too many refugees are coming here. Not true. Our system is able to take many more, and our cities need people to move into. It would be great to have more intact family units, working family units living in our communities. And by the way, refugees have stemmed our county's population loss by 3% from 2000 to 2010. We could go on and on with what this economic study showed, but this is the story that we have been trying to tell as the Refugee Services Collaborative, both through videos and then through data. We know that they're not the silver bullet that's going to address all of our city's ills, but they do have an important role to play. They are a strong and motivated group of people, not only bringing increased diversity into our community, but many of the assets that we have been lacking in our city's core. Assets that were last evident when our parents, our grandparents, our great-grandparents lived in these very neighborhoods. They were immigrants too, just of another stripe, from another continent. But their legacy was undeniable. We believe it's going to be the same with this new group of immigrants and refugees. Their legacy is going to be undeniable. We're just here to give them a helping hand, and we want to thank you all for being part of that.